at least 1 out of 8 people who leave an organization leave it solely because of an uncivil work climate. And so you can talk about pay all day long. You can talk about benefits. You can talk about hybrid work or working from home or whatever. And I'm not saying any of those things aren't important. But if at a minimum 12.5% of people are leaving an organization merely because of an uncivil work climate, I mean, do you need much more than that?
What if the reason people leave your organization has less to do with pay, benefits, or even remote work status, and far more to do with how they're treated? Welcome to the Science for Work podcast, where we explore evidence-based insights from IO psychology and HR management to help make work better. I'm your host, Matt Lampe. In today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Mark Nagy, an industrial organizational psychologist, longtime professor, and consultant who's spent decades helping teams and organizations understand the science and impact of civility at work. This conversation runs a little longer than usual, but that's because it's one of the richest we've had, layered with stories, research, surprising data, and practical ways to think differently about culture, respect, and employee experience. From survey design and behavior change to redefining what it means to contribute, this is more than just a conversation about being nice at work. It's about what civility actually means and how it can reshape performance, retention, and connection in a lasting way. If you enjoy this episode, consider sharing it with a colleague, leaving a review, or subscribing to hear more conversations like this one. You can also visit ScienceForWork.com to learn more or to get involved. Mark, welcome to the Science for Work podcast.
Thank you, Matt. It's wonderful. It really is wonderful to be here. And, you and I have talked, and I look forward to an engaging and fun conversation.
Absolutely. Last time we had talked, we were exploring different ideas that we could discuss on an episode, and we sort of landed on civility, which I walked away thinking, man, this topic is way deeper than people give it, than I even give it credit. And so I'm really intrigued to dive into that. But before we do, tell us a little bit about you. Who is Mark, and what's your background? What got you interested in this kind of work?
Well, I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and I was a college professor for 26 years. For 21 of those years, I was the director of a master's program at Xavier University. Prior to that, I taught at Radford University and worked with some wonderful people at both places. While I was at Xavier, I had the opportunity to do some consulting with the Veterans Health Administration. And on that, I was on a team of folks, primarily actually working with their employee engagement survey. That was my dissertation work 100 years ago, and I knew a little bit about that, and just got lucky. But started working with some people, and on that team, and within that group within the Veterans Health Administration, there was basically like an internal consulting arm, and it was called the National Center for Organization Development. Again, seriously, wonderful people, very committed folks to serving our veterans in the best possible way. And our focus was to look at how we can make the employees more satisfied and engaging so that they could provide that service. And while on the team, there was this initiative that came about called Civility, Respect, and Engagement in the Workplace, or CREW. The acronym is CREW. And that's basically where I began my interest in this area of civility. Now, I had done some reading on the topic, primarily in civility, before this initiative came up within the VHA. But so I was familiar with it. But where I really, if you will, fell in love with this construct was with my work as a consultant for the National Center for Organization Development.
So teaching, working with the VA, and then doing engagement work, but then that becomes a civility survey or civility workshops. What was?
Yeah, that's there was this initiative that was started, and just kind of like file this from, never get too cocky. But we had a meeting in December, or in Washington D.C. We were called it was about December, but we were called to Washington D.C. Our team was to work on this new initiative. And like I said, I'd read some articles and was familiar with some of the research on incivility when they announced this initiative. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like, not that many people know about this, and I do. And I go to this meeting in Washington, D.C., and I'm ready to talk about it. And one of the topics on the agenda was, how are we going to measure civility? Well, I was being familiar with the research. There was an assessment that was out there, and I knew about it. So, man, I'm going to crush this. I can't wait. It's one of those things where, like, you cannot wait to go to this meeting because I'm going to, whatever, make this wonderful contribution. And I talked about this assessment on civility or incivility, and they hated it. And they hated it because it was all negatively worded. It was all in sort of like, what things do people do to you that make you feel bad in a way? Like, do they ignore you?
Oh, yeah.
Do they leave you out of group discussions and things like that? So instead, what we did, after I kind of picked myself up off the floor, what we decided to do was to look at our existing employee engagement survey and to select questions that to us sounded like our conceptualization of civility in the workplace. So that's primarily what's kind of started this work. Was we first needed to measure it, and of course, and this is no disrespect to anyone, but when you get a lot of enthusiasm going for an initiative, you want to move as fast as you possibly can, and that was kind of the best thing that we had. We either had to choose from an existing survey, which didn't exist for civility. It did for incivility, but not for civility. Civility is more positive. What things exist in the workplace in terms of respect for your coworkers, things like that. So there was no pre-existing survey, and given that, then we had to kind of create something quickly, and we took what we knew, which was our existing employee engagement survey, and selected specific items that we felt mapped onto our conceptualization of civility. So that's how that kind of got going there.
Okay, so I would love to get into that civility survey, or what the data and what you started to find. But before I do, I want to back up one step and just make sure that I understand when we talk, when you're talking civility and incivility in the workplace. You gave a few examples of each, but what does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah.
What does that mean in everyday work?
Yeah, what we operated from, and I'll read kind of the clinical definition, if you will, but try to translate that for the masses. But that this definition is came from the research literature, and that's what we use to base our selection of items. Basically, it's demonstrating concern and regard, treating others with respect, and really, if we needed to find a synonym for civility in the workplace, it'd be respect. Treating each other with respect. It's behaviors that help preserve norms for mutual respect at work. So how do we, what's the right thing to do? What do we feel is respectful when we're engaging with each other at work? These behaviors tend to create positive connections with one another, and they build engaging relationships with folks that are on the team. Now, what's important about this concept, what we did at the VHA and the work I've done since then, is that it's not an individual level assessment of civility. It's not how you typically are in all kinds of or most kinds of situations. So it's not a personality type of variable, if you will. For example, you might be social, and you're going to be social likely if you tend to be a very social or extroverted kind of person. You're going to be that way at work, at home, maybe even in church. But this centers around how folks interact within a team.
Okay.
And importantly, how you interact within a team could be very different, even if you're in the same job. You might work with your if you have subordinates or people that you report to, you might interact with them in a different manner than you do perhaps if you're on a more of a horizontal, if you will, team, where you might be maybe you're a director and there's a group of 6 or 7 other directors. That would be considered a team. But then another team might be, if say you're in the oncology department at a hospital, you've got more of a vertical team. So the idea of team civility is how we tend to interact with folks that are on the same team. And again, that could be different depending on the situation.
Yeah. Okay.
So does that help?
Oh yeah.
And then to just kind of, I guess you'd say, close the circle for incivility. The definition is it's a low intensity, which means it's not very, obvious, deviant behavior with ambiguous intent to harm. So in violation of norms for mutual respect. So it's the idea that it's not something that's egregious. It's not something that we would all agree is, if you will, uncivil or disrespectful. And it has that ambiguous intent to harm. So this is the kind of situation where somebody might say a comment, and you might say to yourself, "What did they mean by that? Were they being funny, or were they trying to kind of take a little bit of a jab at me,
Yeah.
and maybe make me look bad in front of other people, or maybe just make me feel bad about myself?" And that sort of thing is difficult to get your arms around, and that's really when we start talking about civility and incivility. The hard thing is, especially with incivility, is that we're usually not sure what that intent was. And sometimes someone may not have purposefully intended to harm us, but what's important is not really their intent. What's important is how we interpret it.
Yeah.
So, you're sitting in your office, and people know that you have this deadline that you're working on, and whatever. You were here at the office last night until 8:30 p.m. and you were here early and whatever, and people know that, and they're trying to keep their distance from you. And then you look out and you see 4 of your coworkers going to lunch, and they didn't ask you to go to lunch. Now, they might not have asked you because they know that you're busy. And in their minds, they're being respectful towards you.
Yeah.
Let's leave Matt alone. He's got that busy project. We'll just. On the other hand, you may be saying, "Why didn't they ask me? What did I do that made somebody upset?" So it may not be it's not their intent. It's how we interpret that. And because it's the interpretation that can oftentimes determine whether or not we feel that we were disrespected, that's why having, and as we'll get into the discussions here, that's why having a team discussion about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate is so important. Because if everyone understands that we're not going to ask Matt to go to lunch today because we know he's got this podcast editing he's got to do, and he's got this other project he's doing, and Matt, you'll know that if we don't ask you to go to lunch, it's because we know that you're busy. In fact, we may even agree that we're just going to say that to you. So we're not going to assume that you know that, but one of us is going to say, "Hey, Matt, we're going to run to lunch. We know you're really busy. You're welcome to join us if you want, but no harm, no foul if you don't want to go." that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Again, having that common understanding is what's so important so that we can prevent these ambiguous interpretations of something that may not have meant to be harmful, but can be interpreted as such.
Yeah. One of the things that I have shared with in different consulting engagements and just with different teams, the meaning of your communication is the result the meaning of your communication is the result you are getting. I mean,
Exactly.
and along that same line, there can be one intention with what is said or what is done, but how it's interpreted can be completely different, and that can change the impact or the significance of that communication or of that behavior. And so having that awareness around it, and to what you were just sharing, some of it being very direct and clearly stating it out loud. Here's what is going on and here's why. That can absolutely help clear up any of the confusion or potential for confusion that could happen through misinterpretation.
Right. Absolutely. And it's really no more than that if you think about it. It's just, but how often do we set aside time to talk about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate? Let's set some ground rules. These ground rules exist, but they're not written down in an organization, let alone in a team environment.
Yeah.
But yet, if everyone understands those ground rules, and when somebody joins the team, we can explain what those ground rules are, then that new person won't be misinterpreting behaviors that had no, that had no intention for harm.
Okay, so back to the VA. So you start building this civility survey, and can you talk about what data did you get from that, and was it surprising? Did it align with what you were expecting? How did that go?
Well, I kind of laugh because it was a while ago now, but the first time that we collected data, and we always did this employee engagement survey. At first, in the very beginning, we did it like every other year, but it became so popular that we ended up doing it every year. So this coming year, we're going to do the survey and we're going to look at these items and see where we're at with civility. And I ran correlations with our civility measure, which again was a subset of 8 items, with all kinds of outcome data that we had. And I was absolutely certain I did something wrong because the correlations were so high. I knew that I'd never seen correlations like that in my life. And I said, I didn't even think, wow, this is a really great construct, man. There's something here. I thought, what did I do wrong? So I literally went back from the very beginning and made sure that I recoded all the variables that I was supposed to recode, and that means like if it was, say, worded in a negative light, you want to it literally just transform it so it's so a low score is a good score kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I literally started from like as though I hadn't got the data set in the beginning. Started from the very, very beginning. Did all that stuff, built all that up, recoded all the variables, this, that, and the other. Ran the analyses and got the same results. I couldn't believe how high these correlations were. Mm-hmm. We were so proud. I'm sorry, I'm such a geek, but we were so proud in the office that we got those correlations that one person, a person who worked full time for the VA, she took the printouts and taped them on the wall. We were so proud of ourselves. But what that really said is, wow, there's something here with the civility idea. Mm-hmm. And when I say outcomes, I'm talking about things like, we called it sick leave. Most people call it absenteeism, but we track sick leave rates. We tracked intentions to turnover. We tracked job satisfaction. We tracked commitment. And those things were just sky high in terms of correlations with this assessment of civility.
Wow.
That's when I kind of thought, wow, we're onto something here. So that to answer your question, that was the beginning of that. Those are the kind of results we got. And what we would do is look at, if you will, pockets of teams that had lower than average civility scores. And again, this is a team. It's not an individual, but it's a team. And to say, okay, well, this team seems to have a little bit lower than average civility score. Maybe they could benefit from some civility training or civility intervention. So that's how we used it. And it was wonderful. The only thing is that the way that you typically create an assessment is not the way that we did it. Again, we were under pressure. There was a lot of enthusiasm. Let's go for it. But the way that you typically create an assessment takes months, if not years, to develop. And usually what you do is you say, okay, what am I trying to measure here? In this case, civility. Okay. And how do we define civility? Just like you asked, Matt, what does that mean? And we looked to the literature and got a definition of civility. But then again, if you're doing something from the ground up, then what you do is you generate a whole bunch of different questions that you think measure this idea of civility or job satisfaction or organizational commitment or job security, whatever it is. But you generate a whole bunch of questions, and then you take those whole bunch of questions and you collect data. You have people take your survey of questions, and then when you get the data back, and you begin to look for items or questions that, if you will, hang together, that are related to one another, that seem to be kind of like in the same universe, if you will, of your construct, and then questions that just don't seem, from a statistical standpoint, to have anything to do with it. So you begin to whittle that down. And ideally, once you have that smaller number of questions, then you actually test it again on a completely different sample. And along the way, you should also include questions or I'll say questions from different things that you think are related to and unrelated to that construct. So for example, with civility, you would think, it's probably related to job satisfaction. So you might have some job satisfaction questions. Oh, I think it's maybe related to fairness. So you'd have some fairness questions. Actually, those are the easy ones. The hard ones is, what does this have nothing to do with? And you start thinking, I don't know, maybe it has something to do with, or maybe it has nothing to do with goal orientation, whether we have a learning goal type of orientation where we want to learn something, or performance goal orientation, where we look at the outcome of performance. Maybe that has nothing to do with civility. So the idea is you take your revised questions and you see how well it fits in with other constructs that you think should be related to it and constructs you don't think should be related to it. As you can tell, that doesn't happen in 24 hours.
Right.
That takes a while. And that became my work after my consulting with the VHA came to an end, is that it was wonderful. I saw the wonderful potential of this construct. And the feedback we would get when we'd go to academic conferences and such was, well, you didn't really develop it the way you should. Well, you weren't there in DC when they were breathing down our necks, looking for an assessment.
Right.
So when I had the time, I did that, and I came up with more or less an independent. When I say more or less, I'll explain that in a second. But more or less an independent assessment of civility, and I say more or less because, of course, the questions I came up with also correlate with that original Veterans Health Administration assessment of civility, which you would expect it to, right?
Yeah, sure.
But so when I say independent, it's not that it has no relationship with it. It does have a relationship with it, statistically speaking, but the questions are different.
I love that in that process, you are pulling in areas that you think are related, but also what's not related, and being able to associate it or identify the connection to things like absenteeism and turnover, things that financially impact a business very hesitate using the word obvious, but can be very obvious. Whereas something like civility may not always get that attention because it could be perceived as soft or less important. But really, what you are seeing is the opposite. That here's why this is not just a nice to have, but really why this is needed, because it impacts all of those other factors.
Right, and it does impact them very strongly.
Yeah.
My favorite story, one of my favorite stories, is when our team at the VA, when we had this, and it was an 8-item measure at the VA, 8-item measure of what we called civility. Again, kind of picking questions from our longer employee engagement survey. We looked at hospitals, because this is a Veterans Health Administration, so there are about 140 hospitals across the country, and we had the scores of an entire, I mean, think of it like visually like an entire hospital building, and put like a number on that. On a scale from 1 to 5. So 3.74. So this hospital is a 3.74 on civility. That hospital is a 4.02, whatever. So we're not talking, again, individuals. We're talking about an entire, ecosystem, if you want to use that word.
Yeah.
And what we found is that hospitals that were deemed to be high in civility spent less than half of investigation money on EEO complaints than hospitals that had low civility. And we looked at the average and we said, okay, 33% are in the middle, 33% are high, 33% are low. Let's look and see. And it's just amazing to me that an entire hospital, so we're not talking about one bad apple, we're talking about kind of the culture. And that's really, when you talk about civility, it's the culture that we have here. And within the team, the culture that we have within the team. But those hospitals that were in the top third in civility spent, again, less than half of the money on just investigating EEO complaints, as opposed to the hospitals that had low civility. Wow. And that, to me, is, that'll get somebody's attention. If the turnover and absenteeism doesn't get their attention, then I think the fact that if you have a culture of civility, people are less likely going to file lawsuits against you will get your attention.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that is something, whether we're talking civility or all sorts of different areas in IO psychology, that being able to identify what is important to the receiver of our message, or to the business organization, because we can come in and all day long and say, here's the things that we see as valuable or important or beneficial to your business, but it may not land as intended. Again, going back to that communication thing, may not land as intended if we're not communicating on a level that they're saying, yeah, but here's what's in it for me. And so I love that what you have pulled here, or what you have demonstrated here with this, is it's not civility for the sake of civility, or to have a nice, respectful workplace just for the sake of being nice and respectful. Yeah, that's good. Everybody wants something like that, but okay, if that's not enough to convince you, what is? Do we want to talk about how it saves you money on this, that, the other thing, how it increases this, all these different factors? All of a sudden, the opportunity or the potential to communicate in a way that message is received in their, I want to say, in their language, or in their priority. That's,
yeah.
I love that.
Christine Porath has done a lot of work in this, and on both the civility and incivility side. And her work, she's estimated that, and by the way, she says this, and I agree with her, that this is probably a low estimate. So we'll say this is the floor. But her work suggests that at least 1 out of 8 people who leave an organization leave it solely because of an uncivil work climate.
Yeah.
And so you can talk about pay all day long. You can talk about benefits. You can talk about hybrid work or working from home or whatever. And I'm not saying any of those things aren't important. But if at a minimum 12.5% of people are leaving an organization merely because of an uncivil work climate, I mean, kind of, do you need much more than that?
Yeah, that's
The Society for Human Resource Management says that it costs about 1.5 times a person's salary to replace them.
to replace them. Yeah.
Now, yeah, I know if they're higher in an organization, it's more. If they're lower, maybe it's a little bit less. But it's just a nice round number, 1.5 times a person's salary. So if you can prevent 12.5% of people leaving, take whatever the average salary is, take 12.5% times the number of employees you have. There you go. That's just one thing,
Yep.
let alone absenteeism and sick leave and literally physical health. We have data that shows that this impacts physical health. All that stuff. Less litigation, higher performance and perceptions of fairness. We've demonstrated that it's related to much higher perceptions of fairness, which probably goes back to that litigation stuff. If you're told you didn't get a job, but there's this climate of fairness there, you're probably less likely to sue than if you think it's unfair.
Yeah.
And then finally, organizational citizenship behaviors, which are basically behaviors that help the organization. Whether it's altruistic or wearing the company's colors out in public or speaking well of it or whatever the case may be. Work cultures that have a high degree of civility are going to have employees that are engaged in more organizational citizenship behaviors. So and again, we just picked one thing. 1 out of 8 people leave because of poor civility. Look at all these other benefits that it has. So you're absolutely right, Matt. This is more than just kind of like, oh, let's make this a nice, like kind of campfire setting where people come to work and hold hands and sing songs, at least at the beginning of every day. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about real impact on employee behaviors. And in fact, again, going back to those initial correlations, the most impact I've ever seen on employee behaviors.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about it, but I'm curious, where else do you see civility showing up in ways that people might not immediately recognize?
I think a great place, and in fact, a great place would be mergers and acquisitions.
Tell me more.
By almost definition, when you have a merger with 2 companies, you have 2 different cultures. And they have different, again, going back to those unwritten ground rules, they have ways of doing things, of maybe everything from how do you ask off of work to, maybe how much you drink or maybe not drink at the holiday party kind of thing. Whatever the case may be. But there's these different, what you're doing literally is merging different cultures. And with civility, you can have and should have a lengthy discussion. In our trainings, we have some skills-based training along with a lot of discussion. But basically, at the root of it all is, how are we going to treat each other with respect? And when you are merging 2 cultures, you want to make sure that not only are respecting both cultures, but that everyone has a common understanding of what it means to be respectful to one another. Maybe that's in responding to an email in 24 hours. Maybe one company has that rule and another company doesn't. So then they merge, and then somebody doesn't respond to an email in 65 hours, and the person's like, I can't believe that person. Again, that ambiguous intent, right? That you're not sure how it's going to be interpreted. But if you sit down and you have a discussion about what's appropriate behavior, what's inappropriate behavior, how are we going to hold each other accountable, those kind of things melt away. So mergers and acquisitions is definitely one area. Another area would be when you have a fast-growing team and there's a lot of change going on. I just was reading about an organization that went from 30 to 300 people in a couple of years. 30 to 300 people.
Whoa.
When you have that much change going on, you don't have a whole lot of history to rely on in terms of what's appropriate and what's not. That's kind of, if you will, like the unwritten orientation. When you started in a company, well, it's okay. So-and-so had a really difficult time, and we're going to kind of, whatever. Her husband just had a serious health issue, and we're going to give her some space, that kind of thing. Somebody kind of like, and it's always that when they're talking a little bit lower, that kind of thing. Well, if you're in a climate where there's a lot of change going on, you don't have that history to draw on. That's another instance when it's really important to just set aside some time. Let's have a discussion. And again, we also have some skills-based training in our intervention where we talk about emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, communication skills, and from the science we take from social psychology and something called attribution theory about how we tend to make attributions about ourselves and others. And that awareness of those skills, along with the discussion of what's our role, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, can be very helpful, again, in a fast-growing organization where you've got a lot, not necessarily turnover, but just a lot of change. So those are two instances. Of course, when what happens all the time is that we get called when there's a team and it's just not functioning well, and it's crucial to the organization's performance. And typically what you find is that there's one or two people that don't like one or two other people, and it just splits the group apart. And
it's a riff. Yep.
Exactly. But again, let's have a discussion. Let's talk about conflict resolution. Let's talk about emotional intelligence and how we manage emotions and how we control emotions and how we perceive emotions. Let's talk, like you mentioned, communication skills. Just, take 30 seconds out and tell me you're going to go to lunch, and you understand if I can't go because I've got something, but you wanted to let me know that I was welcome. That's all it takes. I don't even think that took 30 seconds. That sort of thing. We worked with a company one time, real quick, if I may. These people, these were all at the director level of this organization, which really was more like a vice president level, but they call them directors. And they were a chemical company. And they were really nice people. I mean, they really, really were. But there was an instance where we talked about appropriate communications and things like that. And there was an instance where I'm going to try to use their vernacular, I'm going to get it wrong, but like a pallet of chemicals that was sitting on a loading dock out in the hot sun, like in July, in the middle of July. And as you can imagine, for a chemical company, it's probably not a good thing.
I would think so.
7 of the 8 directors all knew about this, and they didn't do anything because they didn't want to hurt the feelings of the director who was tied up and involved in an employee conflict and didn't know about the product that was on the dock. So they didn't say anything because they didn't want to hurt his feelings. Now that's a laudable thing. You don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings. You can even say that's a respectful thing. But they never had a discussion about, hey, if I see something that needs attention, I'm going to send an email and say, hey, there's some product on the loading dock that is sitting in the hot sun. I'm not sure it's supposed to be there. What do we do with this? Because that's more important. Again, going back to the organization's performance and their bottom line. And that person's going to know that I'm not trying to attack them. I'm doing something that's for the betterment of the team. By having that discussion, they agreed that when they see something like that they would send out an email to each other, and that it would be understood that one person wasn't trying to throw somebody else under the bus.
Yeah.
So when you have a riff, like you said, sometimes all it takes is a discussion. Yeah. It's kind of funny, right? I mean, it's not like we're landing on the moon. It's not that difficult, but how often do we set aside time to have these kind of discussions?
That's the key right there. Not enough.
It is.
Or the time is set aside after it becomes a conflict, and now that time set aside is focused on mediation or resolution, where responding to the conflict versus preemptively addressing, hey, here's how we're going to operate clearly with this, clearly with that, and here's how we operate the gray area in between.
Man, Matt, you are so you just hit a grand slam, because we were invited to go to Washington, D.C. There was a summit on this topic, and a lawyer who was very successful at mediation said so often he would be sitting at a table and saying, if we would have just had this discussion at the beginning, we both wouldn't be sitting here. And by the way, that's how he makes his money. So he's sharing that with the audience, right? But I mean, he's saying if we just had a discussion, we wouldn't be sitting here. But yet, like you mentioned, it escalates, and to the point where now you're sitting across the table from each other.
Yeah.
So having those discussions is absolutely vital to creating an understanding again of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And if it's not appropriate, then and again, part of our training is to determine, for the group to determine, how are they going to hold each other accountable, and if they cannot come to an agreement, what's the next step?
Yeah.
So you don't just automatically run to the president of the company because you're upset. You usually, but the thing of it is that team, not from on high, but that team within itself determines what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And they agree to what is going to happen. And if somebody violates that, if somebody goes to the president right away, but they didn't, we agreed to talk to each other first, then you say, hey, I thought we had an agreement here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you can talk about violations, if you will, of that agreement if it's clearly understood as to what's appropriate and not appropriate.
So are there, and you've kind of talked about some of these already, but are there patterns that you see in organizations that are, patterns in organizations that are getting civility right, or maybe even patterns of this is a big opportunity to shift something?
Yeah, I think that the biggest, I'll start general and go a little bit more specific, but one of the biggest issues in order to get civility right is for everyone on the team to not only know what their role is and what their contributions are, but what other people's contributions are. And that's, again, one of the things that we do, and I'll give away a trade secret here, but usually in the beginning, tell me your name, and I'm Matt and I do this, and I'm Mark and I do that, and I'm, Susie and I do this. And then and we usually do this. We have either a meeting every other week or every other month, or every month, I should say. But sometime later, so not like 5 minutes later, right? But like a couple of meetings later, we'll say, okay, Matt, tell me what Mark does. Susie, tell me what Matt does. And we do that because it's important not only for me to say what I do and for other people to hear it, it's important for them to understand what I do. And when you begin to understand the role that other people have, that goes a long way towards establishing civility. The company that I work for is remarkable in that even though they're in the venture capitalist space, and I'm going to try not to go too far down this road, but even though they're in the venture capital space, they have an assessment that they use to help them make investment decisions. And one of the things they found is that you look at the composition of the team to see how successful, for example, a startup is going to be. Well, when I was hired into the company, they had me take this assessment. And I'm an assessment guy, so I was like, well, how reliable is that assessment? What kind of studies did you, whatever. Actually, I had done that stuff, so I knew it. But my initial reaction was, this is a good assessment, right? But where I'm driving at here is that they hired me because they knew what I brought to the team. And everybody else did too. So when somebody has a need or a question or something like that, in my area, if you will, of maybe my sliver of expertise, they can come to me. They know what I know, and they value what I have. And I value that they value what I have. I know that might sound weird, but it's respect. So what I've seen with in instances where there's a high degree of civility, it's when people understand not only what their own role is, and we talk about that a lot in IO psychology. What's your role? And we talk about role conflict and role ambiguity and things like that. But we don't talk so much about how other people perceive our roles and how other people appreciate our roles. And when they do, that's where you really begin to hit stride with civility. That chemical company I mentioned, the quality control person. So basically, this is like and my joke was she was the principal. Whenever people saw her coming down the hallway, they knew they were in trouble because quality control. And she would see that nonverbal body language that oh damn it, here she comes kind of thing.
Yep.
And she thought no one liked her. But through this team discussion, I think people realized it beforehand, but they certainly realized it afterwards of how hard of a job she has. Yeah. And that when she's going to see them, she's not going to see them to yell at them and whatever. She's going to see them to try to help the company perform better.
Right.
And she realized that they realized that she has a hard job.
Yeah.
Respect. One final story. I know that we're probably going too far, but the ultimate, I was not involved in this. A colleague of mine did this at the Veterans Health Administration. Maybe it's appropriate that we talk about them towards the end here, but mentioned that the work that we did there, they went in and they worked with this company in this hospital. And a colleague of mine goes around the room, tell me what you do. Well, I'm the chief surgeon, on this floor. I graduated from whatever, medical prestigious university, things like that. Tell me about you. I'm the chief head nurse, whatever. Goes around the room, goes to the last person. Tell me what your role is. I'm just a janitor. That's what he said. I'm just a janitor. Well, they go through the 6-month training, talking about, again, doing some skill-based training, but also what's your role? What are others' roles? How does that role contribute to team performance and things like that? And at the end of the 6-month training, again, they met once a month, the person came up to my colleague and said, I want you to know I'm not just a janitor. I'm responsible for creating a sterile work environment so that our veterans can get the best care possible. And she said his body language was different. The way he spoke was different. He was proud of what he was doing. And I am convinced that he was proud of what he was doing, not only because he realized what his contribution was, but because other people realized what his contribution was. And they said, he's not just the janitor, because if he doesn't have, if the operating room's not sterile, if he doesn't do his job, it doesn't matter how good of a surgeon I am. We need everybody to work together. And an intact team should have that feeling of everyone's contributing something very important for a larger cause. And in this case, it was service to our veterans. So that's when you know that you've hit the stride and you've got a high performing and a high scoring, if you will, civility group.
I love that story. That one individual has a totally different take on their job, on their role, on their responsibilities, how they are a part of the team, not just in support of. I mean, just so many different things. That's awesome.
And when that happens, do you think that person's going to leave for a 25%, a 25-cent increase somewhere else? No way. Are they going to stay at home because whatever, the British Open is on TV or whatever the case may be? No, they're not they're going to want to go to work. So they're not going to be absent. They're not going to leave the organization. They're going to perform well. All of those things that we talked about at the beginning that should be and are meaningful to an organization's bottom line.
So if somebody's listening and they're thinking, okay, I care about this. This sounds wonderful. I want this at my workplace, but where do I even start? What would you say to that?
Well, what I would say to that, I mean, not to self whatever, but for my work with the VA, I did create an assessment of team civility, if you will, from the ground up, and something that worked with a federal agency. Short surveys are good. So the work that I created, developed an assessment that's reliable and valid. It's 30 questions. It takes 5 minutes. And that's a really good starting point because um, through that work, we identified 5 different, if you will, sources of civility. The individual, and believe it or not, and I still have a hard time believing this, but people readily admit when they're not civil to somebody else. Yeah, I didn't call them back, Oh, okay. Or, oh, I didn't invite them to lunch because I don't like them. Oh, okay. So there's the individual, like what an individual contributes to the team civility. Supervisor, what the supervisor does. And a lot of times the supervisor may be the cause of angst. So there's an individual component, a supervisor component, a coworker component, of course, how coworkers support or not support each other. There's the work environment, which is larger than just the team. It's more like the organizational culture. And then communication, civil communication. So even though we might not necessarily be directly disrespectful to an individual, we may use off-color jokes, those kind of things, and that may be off-putting. So this, and I was not expecting to find those 5 sources. I just wanted to measure civility and do something from the ground up. But we uncovered 5 different sources. That would be one thing, to use the assessment that we created. But if nothing else, I would look for an assessment of civility and basically validate if you've got concerns of low civility, to validate that those concerns exist. Because this training is not, if it's one of the things where if you ask about it, you better do something about it. And if you suspect that there's low civility, start with an assessment. If you uncover that there is low civility, then you need to set aside time. We've had so many conversations with entities that want to do this in 30 to 60 minutes. There is just no way you're going to get this kind of depth and this kind of transformative change. No one's going to go into that 60-minute training and say, I'm just a janitor, and come out after 61 minutes and go, I'm not just a janitor. I'm responsible. That's not going to happen. Okay. You need to be committed to it. And it's best if you have a training. If, like I said, I think this model that the VA did was great. Either once every month, a couple of hours a month, or once, maybe every other week, but 1 or 2 hours each time. And what we do is like I said, and what the VA did, we include some skill-based training. So it's not just a discussion, but how do you handle conflict resolution? What is emotional intelligence, and what can you take from that? Managing your emotions, interpreting emotions, perceiving emotions, those kind of things. Attributions are a huge thing. If somebody's 5 minutes late to a meeting, we automatically think something's wrong with them. We don't know that their child was throwing up all night and that they basically broke all kinds of speed laws to get here, and they're only 5 minutes late. A lesser person would have just called off.
Right. Yeah.
So we automatically make those kind of attributions. So we talk about those biases and attributions. So we have the skills-based training. And what I would say to an organization is absolutely, at a minimum, uncover what roles people have, identify what roles people have, and then also make sure that they realize everyone else's role on the team. And then hopefully, ideally, follow it up with some skills-based training so that they can have the skills that they can implement into the workplace. And then from there, the team basically says, this is how we're going to behave. This is how we're going to hold each other accountable. I mean, and this is all local. I mean, what I've heard of many organizations saying that we have a 24-hour rule for responding to an email. I think that's great. What if you're in an emergency room? You don't have 24 hours. Well, I did it within 24 hours. Well, it might be like 10 minutes, at the most. So you have to look at the organization. You have to look at the situation, and the team needs to come up with something that's appropriate for them. This cannot be coming down from on high, because in a hospital, 24 hours may be appropriate in some areas of the hospital, but may be completely inappropriate in others. So let that team knows what's best for them. Let them decide. So start with assessment. Yeah. start with assessment and then have discussions and hopefully some skill-based training. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. What I was thinking there is, this is not prescriptive necessarily as much as it is empowering. Here are the skills. Here's what this can look like. Here's how you can measure it and assess it. But ultimately, the responsibility, the onus falls back on the team to not just do this, but to own it, to be part of it,
Exactly.
to contribute to it, for it to be successful and sustainable.
Absolutely. And we actually, what we do is we call it a civility code of conduct, where we write down those things literally like on a one-page document and have each person sign it. So they acknowledge that they accept this. And what I would say is, when you bring somebody else on the team, you now have a working document in their onboarding that you can point to. And it's not just something in low tones, like we said before, but it's something that says, okay, this is how we're going to treat each other. We're in the emergency room. You have 10 minutes to get back to somebody if they've contacted you. If they paid you, you have 10 minutes. Even if you say, I'm on lunch or I'm getting my foot operated, whatever, you have 10 minutes, but it's written down so everyone knows. So it makes it easier for those new people to be onboarded. And again, in the ambiguous situations where there's a lot of growth, or you've got a merger and acquisition and you're merging two or more cultures together, that's where it can really be beneficial.
Mark, this has been just a wonderful conversation, very thoughtful conversation. I love not just the examples that you've shared, but some of the impact, some of, how the janitor story is sticking in my mind. And when you had shared that previously with me, that stuck in my mind. Just such a powerful example of how the work that you do can make work better, can make lives better. So thank you for that, and for for that story as well. That's encouraging.
Well, it's encouraging. It's also wonderful when you're part of it, even if like I wasn't there when that happened, but to be working with somebody who took some of the work that I was involved with at the team and the assessment, and I had a little part in that. But she's a wonderful facilitator, and I'm sure all the credit should go to her. But it's just neat, and it's wonderful to be part of that. And this is literally, I saw that with the chemical company, and the quality control person didn't mention that she was crying because she was like, wow, they really understand that I'm not a bad person. This is transformative stuff. This isn't just like a check the box compliance, okay, get off of our back kind of thing. That's why you can't do this in 60 minutes. If an organization is committed to this, like everything else, whether it's losing weight, building muscle, getting a degree, whatever the case may be, it takes some time. But the benefits, like all of those things, are worth it. And the biggest issue that I see is that, again, we get calls all the time. Can you do this? And we're having our upcoming whatever training, and can you do this from like 2:15 to 3:00? And you know what? Honestly, Matt, it'd be easy to take their money.
Sure.
It'd be easy to say, sure, yeah. Just make sure that you make the check out to, but we refuse because it's not going to be impactful to us as well. It's not going to make a change.
I love that.
So,
Mark, where can people learn? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say thank you for allowing me to be on your podcast, and I love the Science for Work because, as you can tell from our discussion, a lot of science informed what we do here. We're bringing stuff from social psychology, we're bringing stuff from psychometric theory and things like that, and we're implementing science into the workplace.
Yeah, that's I love this organization as well for that same thing. There's so much wonderful, incredible, insightful, valuable knowledge and information that science has uncovered and continues to explore. And the more that we can get that out to the masses in easy to digest, easy to understand, practical applications, man, the potential is huge. The opportunity is there. And so anytime that we get people like you who get to join us for a conversation, share some of that insight, share some of the work that you're doing, not just for the sake of here's the work, but here's the impact. And that's
Mm-hmm.
that's powerful.
Yes.
That's incredible. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
So Mark, where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing and Civility?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. It's Mark S. as in Stephen Nagy. So Mark S. Nagy, to maybe cut down the search, because there's a few Mark Nagys out there. Not that they're good people, but you can find me by Mark S. Nagy on LinkedIn. I also the company that I work for, I mentioned earlier, is called Wendell, WEWENDAL. So you can find me at, you can email me at mark@wendell.com. And they bought our consulting business a number of years ago, and we've maintained that website and everything, which was Marcus Management. So you can email me at marcusmgmt.com, or our website is Marcus Management, marcusmgmt.com. So those are the different avenues. I mean, probably not appropriate, but I could also, okay, those are the ways to do it. I was going to give out my phone number, probably not the best thing to do, but those
that's
are,
up to you.
yeah, I mean, well, I mean, if anybody's interested in this, they want to call me, hell, call me. I mean, let's make an impact. I mean, okay. My cell phone number is 513-379-2873. So they can call me on my cell phone. I may not answer because I've got meetings and I do podcasts and things like that, but I'll call you back, or text me, heck, whatever you want. But I love the kind of transformative impact this makes. And it really, Matt, I mean, you're of the same cloth. It's why we got into this work.
Yep.
It's because we're really making a meaningful difference in a meaningful change. And that is so cool. That's invigorating. And I'm sure it is for you as well. It's invigorating when that happens. So for people who are like us and want to make that kind of change, let's do it.
Absolutely. Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation, very engaging conversation. Can't believe an hour has gone by. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time, sharing your insights, sure. and just, this was wonderful.
And thank you, Matt. Thank you for the podcast that you do, again, in integrating science into work. It's not just somebody's opinion. We're really relying on research that's been done before and taking that and then implementing it. So thank you for leading the charge on that. I really do. I personally appreciate it, and I'm like a lot of things. You're making a heck of a difference in this world. So that's wonderful.
Thanks for listening to the Science for Work podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it or leaving a review. It might just be the opportunity that helps someone else discover evidence-based insights they can use in their work. For more research-backed resources, articles, and tools, or to get involved with the Science for Work community, visit us at ScienceForWork.com. A special thanks to our guest and to the entire Science for Work team. Science for Work is an independent, nonprofit foundation of evidence-based practitioners who want to make work better.